Thank you, Desiree, for inviting us to speak this evening. My name is Bryn Gingrich. I'm the Outreach Director at Lincoln Land Conservation Trust, and I'm here today with my colleague, Sara Lupkas, our Stewardship Director. And tonight we'd like to share our experiences from the past 3 years as we work to implement Lincoln's Pollinator Action Plan.
Thanks, Bryn. I'm going to start with a brief overview of the project and share a few examples of our project implementation. Then Bryn is going to share our experiences with our pollinator plant sales and volunteer engagement. The Lincoln Pollinator Action Plan has really been a great initiative to collaborate on with regards to our outreach and stewardship goals. As Stewardship Director, my focus is on managing our lands, and this initiative has been a useful way to both focus our efforts and provide a framework for prioritization. I hope you were able to watch Dr. Jagir's presentation earlier this month, which was such a compelling explanation of why these native plants are necessary to support vital pollination systems and ecosystem services. We worked with Dr. Jagir and Evan Abramson, who distilled Dr. Jagir's list of recommended plants into landscape designs and planting schemes for different conservation areas in Lincoln. As we have added these plants to the landscape, Dr. Jagir's graduate students have been studying the bees that visit the plants to track changes in native pollinator populations. I'll start by sharing a bit about our People for Pollinators Meadow. The Pollinator Meadow was created in 2016 by a group of community partners. It's been a very visible site. It is close enough to our elementary school that classes and scout troops come out to visit it regularly, and it also is situated between a large free parking lot and popular trails, so we get many walkers and runners who pass through the area. As part of Evan's design, we have been working to enhance the composition of plants within the fenced area and also improve the aesthetics and functionality of the area outside the fence. One of the most important but also challenging aspects was clearing the existing vegetation. On the right, you can see the fencing which encloses the original pollinator meadow. In our first growing season of the Pollinator Action Plan, we cleared an area outside the fence and planted various species of pollinator plants that Dr. Jagir gave to us and were monitored by his graduate students. You can also see in the background a slightly makeshift tent that we attached rain barrels to in the hopes that any runoff from the tent would feed into the rain barrels. One of the biggest challenges was ensuring there was enough water at our various sites for these young plants. Here are a few pictures of the plant lab with the plants that Dr. Jagir provided. You can see prunella and the obedient plant blooming. We planted some willows and shrubs around the fenced area in the summer of 2020. And then in the spring of 2021, we added many more plants, almost 100 shrubs. We had high school seniors come out to plant these on their annual day of service. They were a great group of kids and made digging almost 100 holes in a thick thatch look easy. These pictures show the plants settling in by the end of the summer 2021. Buttonbush, swamp rose, and meadowsweet were among the shrubs we added. In the fall of 2021, we identified parts of the original fenced meadow that were mostly non-native grass. We removed sod from these areas and planted plugs, including switchgrass and Pennsylvania sedge. Around the plugs, we also sowed a mix of pollinator seeds that were recommended in the action plan. Lastly, we planted about 25 willows outside the fenced meadow. We sourced the meadow, shining, and prairie willows from Wing and a Prayer Nursery in Western Massachusetts. One drawback to planting outside of the fence was damage from deer browsing. We sprayed the plants with a solution of plant skid, which definitely helped reduce the damage. We were able to see a pretty clear demarcation of where the deer were used to walking through because not every plant was touched, only plants that were on their route. Plant skid also needs to be reapplied every couple weeks, and sometimes it's recommended that you switch it up with a different solution so that they don't become too immune to the smell. One of the big recommendations in the action plan for the pollinator meadow was to create a place for visitors to gather and seek shelter. In fall of 2021, LLCT recruited several volunteers to help install footings for a pavilion. And as you can see, work has continued this spring, again with incredible support from a few volunteers and town conservation staff. The pavilion now offers a shady area for visitors and volunteers to relax in and serves as a meeting point for educational programming at the meadow. Additionally, the roof and gutters direct rainwater into 4 rain barrels. In the summer of 2022, we planted plugs from the plant sale in the areas that had been sod cut and seeded last fall. We also had volunteers from the Lincoln Summer Camp help mulch around shrubs, and you can see a blooming obedient plant. In the fall of 2022, we added solar panels on the roof to the pavilion, which power a small pump for the rain barrels so that water can flow through a hose as opposed to filling watering cans and buckets as we previously needed to do. We planted northeastern beard tongue, sweet goldenrod, showy goldenrod, and flat-topped aster. To keep the weeds down, we mowed the area short and then put down cardboard and mulch around each plant. Now we're going to move to a different area, which is called Chapman Pasture. It's an 8-acre area that was used to graze sheep for over 40 years and was composed almost entirely of non-native grasses. It's surrounded by other conservation areas, which together form over 95 acres of protected land. Our goal is to convert the pasture to a native pollinator meadow with some areas of shrubs. Due to the size of the field and the uniform covering of non-native grasses, Evan recommended we conduct a prescribed burn to expose the soil for seeding and helped us apply for a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grant to cover the cost of the burn. We conducted one burn in May of 2021 and a second one in March of 2022. There was significant preparation we had to do to be ready for the burn. The field edges needed to be cleared of invasive shrubs and vines, and also there were multiple layers of barbed wire fencing to remove. We had help from our town's conservation department and our summer interns, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife hired a contractor to work on the field edges as well. We also limbed up the trees to prevent damage to them from the fire. This was the day of the burn and the burn crew and some aerial photos of the field. We have 7 bluebird boxes in Chapman and a very dedicated volunteer, Patty, who monitors the boxes for activity. She went out to check on the bluebird chicks in the morning before the burn and after the burn was over. As you can see, the burn crew wet down the area around each box to protect them from the flames, which is why there is still some living grass around them. On the right, you can see LLCT staff walking through the field with a neighbor who abuts the field and who was instrumental in allowing us access to the field and a staging area for the burn. While we own most of the surrounding land, there are very few ways to access the field in a vehicle, so having good relationships with the neighbors has been critical. In early fall of 2021, LLCT staff and volunteers headed out to Chapman to plant 35 native willows. The willows were grouped around rocky outcrops in the field, a recommendation from the action plan that is intended to make mowing easier in the field. As you can also see, by the end of the summer, we were seeing a greater diversity of plants and pollinators in the field. Here are a few pictures from our second prescribed burn, which happened in March of 2022. By burning earlier in the season, the grass was still quite brown and we had a more complete burn. Another benefit of the earlier date was that the bluebirds had not yet nested and there was less disruption to them. LLCT staff and a few volunteers sowed a cover crop of oats the week after the burn. Because the soil was exposed, but it was not the right time of year to plant the wildflower seeds, we needed to cover the soil to prevent the thatch from growing back too thickly and prevent weed seeds from germinating. And we were hoping to use a cover crop that's killed by freezing temperatures, so we wouldn't need to worry about it becoming too vigorous and outcompeting our wildflowers. We did need to try a few different cover crop varieties, including field oats, buckwheat, and crimson clover. On the right, you can see a few tiny seedlings. We had a small amount of seed mix and sowed a small area in Chapman with the wildflower seed mix at the same time as the oats. In the fall of 2022, we mowed a portion of the field and then using a seed drill sowed that portion with a pollinator mix. The seeds that were sown needed cold stratification, so they needed to be sown right before the winter to have the appropriate amount of time in freeze-thaw cycles to germinate. We have more seeds that do not need cold stratification, so those will be sown this spring. And now that I've gone through what we've done, I just want to highlight an issue, which is what success would look like in this area. We originally began this process thinking it would be a 3-year project and realized pretty quickly that it will never have a neat or tidy conclusion. The scale of the area, the vegetation that's already present means that there is a great deal of weed pressure on this parcel. There were certain challenges we had not expected since this is one of the first larger sites that we have been actively managing. We also don't have backgrounds in landscape management and did not have much of the equipment that we found we needed. So it has been a process of trial and error, but it's also been incredibly rewarding to see the changes that have already taken place. Chapman is an area that will be a high priority for us for years to come. There will always be more plants that we can add. Eventually, we hope to move to a mosaic mowing pattern where we only mow 1/3 of the area each year, but that is probably a few years off. For us, every year that we can improve the biodiversity of this area and increase the proportion of native plants, we consider to be a success.
Thanks, Sarah. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about our pollinator plant sales and how we've tried to engage the communities. So as you've seen from our pollinator meadow and Chapman Pasture, we've been busy adding plants that were recommended in the action plan to sites around Lincoln. In 2020, when we were beginning to purchase plants for our own plantings, we realized that it made sense to help get these plants out into the community as well. The idea sparked our first pollinator plant sale. Since then, we've had 3 plant sales and are in the midst of finalizing plans for this springs. The sales have been a great way to remove barriers for gardeners interested in helping build out Lincoln's pollinator pathway. Rather than structuring the plant sale as a fundraiser, LLCT offers our plants at close to wholesale cost in the hope that we can make installing a pollinator garden financially accessible to as many people as possible. We encourage purchasers to join the land trust as a member, which helps us cover our plant delivery costs and some of the plantings on conservation land. Our first membership level is only $35, and we've seen a large increase in the number of members at that level due to the sale. For those purchasing a kit, the cost of membership is still way below the retail price for an order of these plants. So I'm going to start with our 2020 sale. We offered both native shrubs and perennials. We offered them as a kit of 9 shrubs. It was cost about $100. You can see they're pretty small, they're gallon pot shrubs. And then since it was the height of the pandemic, we had participants pre-order, and then we had a contactless drive-through pickup. And this turned out to be a great model, and we've continued to do pre-orders only and a drive-through pickup, even as COVID restrictions have eased. You can see we had a rainy day of organizing our plants. I'd like to also highlight a great partnership with the Lincoln Parks and Recreation Department, who allowed us to use their tennis courts and parking lot for the sale. This was only possible because the tennis courts had been shut down for the COVID pandemic, but it's great we were able to have all the plants delivered, locked up overnight on the courts, and then we brought them out into the parking lot the next morning and lined them up for pickup. And then we had a second plant pickup later that same summer, as the perennials that we ordered were not available for the early spring pickup. So this time we organized the pickup at Lincoln Station, which is in South Lincoln, Massachusetts, and it's the building where our office is located. And the restaurant at the time was not using the patio. So we were able to store and distribute the plants from this wonderful covered patio connected to the building. Something we learned very quickly is that the plugs came in trays of 50. And this is great for the folks who ordered 50 plugs, but most people didn't. So we ended up cutting up the plug trays or wrapping plugs in wet newspaper and trying to box up people's orders in these cardboard boxes, which actually worked very well. We took banana boxes from the local grocery store that they were going to recycle, and we placed everyone's order in their own box. Since that first sale, we have switched to offering just potted plants at a slightly larger size. We found they tend to be more successful and they're a lot easier to distribute to folks. I also want to note, I'm not going to go through all of the plants that we've offered in the last few years, but all that information is available on our website. And I'm happy to answer questions about specific offerings at the end of this presentation. So here is just a little screenshot of the interactive map that we have on our website that shows the locations of our plant sale participants' gardens. And we removed identifying data, so it just shows the pin in the general area. And you can see it's not just Lincoln, goes way beyond in many neighboring towns. But this has been a great way to visualize the expansion of Lincoln's pollinator pathway, especially considering we have 2 to 3 conservation sites, and as we'll talk about later, a lot of other demonstration gardens around town, but that would just be 4 or 5, and instead we see about 100, well, we had about 100 to 150 purchasers every year, and I'd say there's about 230 unique sites in this pollinator pathway. About 75% of our participants are from Lincoln, but again, we see participants from a lot of the neighboring towns as well. So we did offer a sort of kit model, which is where you would just press one button to buy, and it would include maybe 10 shrubs, or we had perennial kits, which offered maybe 20 or 30 plants in a bundle. But we've also always offered all of our plants also a la carte, and this has been a great option. So the kits are one-stop shopping. We curate a nice robust set of plants that are going to bloom throughout the season, are generally going to do well in medium soil and full to part sun. So it's an easy way to just get a fairly functional pollination system started in your yard in just the first year. But we also wanted to make the sale accessible to folks who may not have the space or financial ability to purchase a whole kit. So we offered all of our plants as an a la carte. So you can see here, this person had purchased just a couple of blueberry bushes. They had space right in front of their condo. And we also find that some of our experienced gardeners that we know in town are looking to fill a very specific gap in their garden. So they might also purchase a la carte. And then here are our pollinator pathway signs. So we've handed these out with our kits at all 3 of our pollinator plant sales. And people really love them. It's amazing. It's a great way to brand the pathway, and you see them when you drive through town, and you immediately can identify that, oh, this person has learned about the pollinator project. They purchased some plants, and they're growing a garden. We also put them in all of our demonstration gardens. They were relatively inexpensive. I'd say if you buy in bulk, they're under $2. If you're buying just a few, the price goes up, but they've held up fairly well, and it's been 3 years now. We will be pursuing permanent signage at our established conservation sites eventually, but for now, these are just a great way to get the word out about our work for a relatively low investment. So here's some pictures from our 2021 plant sale. Again, we offered perennials and shrubs, and we had great continued interest in the project with 150 members participating in the sale. In 2021, we were really grateful to use the Lincoln DPW's parking area. We coordinated delivery from nurseries on a Friday, and then all the plants spent the night behind the DPW building. And then on Saturday, we organized all the orders and had, again, a drive-through pickup process. As you can see, some great volunteers unloading and loading plants. Community partners have been really critical to this project. As I mentioned, we were grateful to the DPW for letting us use their space. We also partnered that year with the Great American Rain Barrel Company to offer wholesale priced rain barrels. Lincoln's water department shared their existing rain barrel and water conservation resources with us, and we sold about 50 rain barrels. So it's a great collaboration because it's an important conservation issue. And for folks who are putting in a pollinator garden, a rain barrel is a great way to complement the environmental work that they've committed to doing. And as you can see here in this photo, this is one of our interns, his truck, and he was competing with our other summer intern to see how they could drive around with the most rain barrels in the back of the truck. And then on the left here, you can see these are garden carts borrowed from the Lincoln Garden Club. They had just hosted their own pollinator plant, or not a pollinator plant sale. They had just had their own plant sale and had let us borrow their carts for the day. So this was great because we were able to very quickly and efficiently move plants around the site. And then here's our 2022 sale. So last spring, once again, it was all pre-orders, and we pivoted to a new site again. So we got permission to host the sale in the town of Lincoln's commuter lot. It's a paid lot, but it's located right adjacent to the parking lot of Lincoln Station, which is where our office is located. So because it was a Friday, there were a couple paid commuters that were parked, as you can see on the upper left, but we did get permission to basically take over the site for the day. We haven't really seen a return on Fridays, at least, of commuter parking in that lot. A lot of people are now working from home. If they're going to be working from home, it's on a Friday. But this site was a little tricky because we couldn't store the plants overnight. We weren't going to put up a fence, and we didn't feel comfortable leaving them unattended. So we coordinated with 2 nurseries that were delivering plants to both come on that Friday morning. And then we had a wonderful crew of volunteers descend on this parking lot. And it just took them a couple hours to unload all the plants, organize the orders, and get them ready for an afternoon pickup. The proximity to our office also made this really easy. We were able to just run back upstairs and check email or run back for supplies. And then another serendipitous perk of this space was that all the commuter spots are numbered. And this is for people when they're paying for their parking. But it meant that we could put an order in a parking spot, note that number, and then as people were coming through the drive-through to pick up their plants, we could just tell them, oh, you're in spot 94, and they could drive right to it. And a volunteer would be waiting there to help them load up their car. So this was a great thing, and I think we'll continue to try and use this parking lot in the future for future plant sales. So far we've discussed, Sara shared a lot of great information about our 2 large conservation sites. I wanted to now spend a little bit of time talking about Lincoln's pollinator pathway and the expansion of demonstration gardens along public roads. So as I've mentioned, LLCT's office is located at Lincoln Station, but the whole commercial area is actually owned by our sister organization, the Rural Land Foundation of Lincoln. So we actually had a little bit of leeway in getting permission to put in a new pollinator garden in this space. So that was really exciting. So in 2020, we identified a small area of grass that's at the edge of the property. It's bordered by a walking path from the Lincoln Woods housing development and the Lincoln Station parking lot, and it's visible from the main Lincoln Road. So in May 2020, we broke ground and planted about 25 shrubs, including 2 species of roses, meadowsweet and northern bush honeysuckle. As you can see, we just popped them in the grass, put some mulch down to help keep the weeds at bay, and called it a day. So it was kind of a small start, and you can see here the walking path on the right of that photo is kind of leads right to the Lincoln Station parking lot. So that following spring, so this is spring 2021, we expanded the site. We asked our landscaper at Lincoln Station to dig up the grass around the existing plants and also add a second little plot on the other side of the walking path. We put in additional shrubs and about 130 perennials, including blue stem goldenrod and scarlet bee balm. Throughout the summer, we had a wonderful volunteer who lived nearby, and she stopped by to water and weed. And it's really wonderful. Every time we're out there working, people from the Lincoln Woods were walking by, complimenting the space. So you can see here, those plugs going in. And this is the space at September 2021, the Joe Pye weed, the swamp milkweed, the bee balm starting to flower. And then in fall of 2021, the blue stem goldenrod is starting to bloom. And then the following spring, the willows, this is the first time I had seen them bloom. Willows are really critical early spring pollen sources. And then on the right, this is our beach plum. And then in June, the butterfly weed on the right there and the northeastern beard tongue are starting to bloom. And in July, we've got Joe Pye weed, the purple hyssops on the right, and the St. John's wort is the yellow plant. So it really filled out in 3 years. It's amazing. And then lastly, in August, you can see a little bit further away the whole site, and it's in this oasis in the grass. but I think it's really been a wonderful beautification project for the area. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. So we also planted some additional demonstration sites. In 2021, we added 2 other gardens that, like the Lincoln Station site, were meant to beautify the roadsides and increase visibility for the pollinator pathway. They also provide for the bees. We continue to use the action plan and Dr. Jagir's plant list as a guide. Here are some of the plantings of our Codman Road, Route 126 site. This site is a road island located at a busy intersection. There are conservation and farm fields on either side of Codman Road. We got permission from the DPW and the Roadside Traffic Committee to plant on this site. They approved our project as long as we ensured that the plants would not impact visibility for cars trying to turn at this traffic island. We had a wonderful group of volunteers come out in late May to help plant, and subsequently we had 2 or 3 people who would stop by throughout the summer to check on the plants and water and weed as needed. Watering was a challenge as there is no water near the site. We had our summer interns fill rain barrels every week, which were, you can't really see it, but they were across the street on one of the farm fields. So our interns would fill the rain barrels every week, and then our volunteers could use those rain barrels to fill watering cans and buckets. These are the plants going in, and then you can see how they've filled in just a few months later. And the prunella, the blue stem goldenrod, and the northeastern beer tongue were getting established. We had a pretty significant drought this past summer, which was a big challenge. And we had a wonderful volunteer, Mike of Organic Soil Solutions, a landscaping company, help us out by stopping by every so often with his watering truck. And he would just stand there and water with the watering truck, but it was much quicker than hauling buckets of water. And our other 2021 installation was a pocket garden adjacent to the parking area of one of our conservation areas, Harrington. Harrington is a popular hiking spot, and the parking lot is on a busy road, so there's great visibility. Again, we had a great group of volunteers show up to plant in late May, and several of them continued to stop by regularly to check on the garden. At this site, we used cardboard and mulch to keep the weeds down, and that seemed pretty effective. We also had to set up some rain barrels here also. And again, the rain barrels are not connected to any gutters, so our summer interns would fill them up at pretty much once a week from larger buckets, and then it just provided a watering source for our volunteers to fill up their rain barrels and buckets. And as you can see, the scarlet bee balm and beer tongue are flourishing. This site does have more pressure from vegetation as it abuts conservation land. Although the cardboard helped the perennials get established, we need to do more weeding at this site to keep it clear. We also removed a small black locust tree from the edge of the garden to reduce pressure from its seedlings and to give the site more sun. And I just want to thank again our volunteers, many of whom have helped plant, weed, and water for 3 years now. Without them, we really would not be able to have these sites looking as good as they do and getting so well established.
Thanks, Sarah. We're almost through our presentation, and we just wanted to give a quick sneak peek at what's next for us this coming year. We have decided to create a new demonstration site in close proximity to the Codman Community Gardens, and this really fills a nice gap between our other demonstration sites in Lincoln. It forms sort of a triangle between the Codman site and the Harrington site that Sarah just talked about, and the Lincoln Station Garden. So it's really helping to continue that idea of a pathway where we're hoping to build enough habitat that bees can jump from one pollinator garden to the next and really travel throughout town. So we will be planting a combination of purchased plants and seedlings grown by volunteers from our fall seed saving workshop and winter sowing workshop. And we have reached out and gotten permission from the Roadside Traffic Committee in Lincoln. It's always great to kind of know who the key players are, and when you're looking at a parcel, to know who owns it, who's going to manage it. So this has been sort of part of our process. And then we've also been reaching out to Codman Farms and the Codman Community Gardens to see if we can use their water spigot, and maybe volunteers from the garden would be interested in helping with this site. So it's also just another really cool opportunity for more partnerships in town. And if you're interested in helping to plant and maintain the space, please do reach out. We're always happy to hear from volunteers. So lastly, we are launching our 2023 plant sale soon, and we'll continue to work closely with partners in town to explore new sites. So this plant sale will be online probably in the next 2 weeks, and we encourage you to check it out, join our email list, and you'll hear about it. And then lastly, to close, I did want to just reiterate the part of the pathway. We're hoping for a new focus in the coming years on the roadsides, because these are like veins through town. And if we can get pollinator plants of some kind on the roadsides, we think that it'd really help beautify town and create a lot more habitat for bees in areas that are fairly marginal right now. So I'll turn it over to Sara.
Thank you. So we hope that this presentation has given you just a little overview of how LLCT has been implementing our pollinator action plan and expanding the pollinator pathway through town. We have been so inspired by the response from our community and the compliments that the conservation and demonstration sites have received. Not only are these spaces beautifying the town, they are creating pockets of functional habitat that are slowly but surely becoming connected. And in addition to us focusing on roadsides, it's also been gratifying to see more of a push just among residents in general to get rid of more of their lawns and plant more pollinator plants in place of just monoculture of grass. So we are happy to answer any questions that you might have about how you can do this on your own property. And also our website has a lot of the information on the specific plants that we have sold in the past and that we're selling this year.
I'll stop sharing.
Hey, Bryn and Sara, thank you so much. It's truly a community-wide effort. The sheer number of partners and volunteers that you have involved with this is just incredible. So thank you for sharing and diving in deep about how all these little pieces kind of intersect. So let's open it up to questions from the audience. Okay, so we have a question. Alan says, fantastic, congratulations. How many volunteers do you have and how do you recruit them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start and then Sara, you can jump in if I forget anything. I would say that we have about 20 to 30 volunteers that we reach out to on a regular basis, and maybe 5 to 10 that are active at any one time. We recruit just from our website and events like this and other programming. So we have hosted in the past a lot of programming at our pollinator meadow, bee identification workshops. When we launched the plan, we hosted 2 programs, one with Dr. Gingrich to kind of give an overview of why we're interested in supporting functional pollination systems, and another with Evan Abramson to talk about specifically the Lincoln Action Plan. So those 2 programs in the spring of 2020 sparked a lot of interest in the community, and we got a lot of people who basically responded afterwards to our call for volunteers. And then now we sort of reach out whenever we're having an activity. So we had our seed saving workshop and our fall sowing workshop in September and December of last year. And so now those people are on our email list as people we'd like to reach out to see if they're interested in continuing to be involved. I will say that we definitely get a lot of interest for planting days. Everyone turns out, it's really fun. And then it is a little bit more challenging to get continued interest to, weed and water throughout the summer. But what we found is you really just need 1 to 2 dedicated people for a site to make it successful, because our demonstration sites are pretty small. An hour to a week is quite sufficient to sort of keep an eye on them. But it's always fun to go with a friend. So we do try and, help our volunteers coordinate so that there can be multiple people there.
Oh, I just want to add also, we have some other volunteers because I'm sure this is true of most high schools in the area, but our local high school has a requirement for all students that they need to complete a certain number of community service hours. And especially once they have their driver's license and would like to have a parking pass at the school, they have to have completed a certain number of hours. So we always get some inquiries, especially over the summer, which makes it easier because we always need help in the summer with watering and weeding. So that's another area. It's harder for the high school students to be like regular volunteers who help us out every single week, especially during school. But whenever we have something like a little bit bigger, you know, we have some that we can call on, and we also do try to encourage them to like pair up with a friend so that they're not out in the hot sun working by themselves for a few hours, because that isn't always that enjoyable, especially to a teenager. But that's just one other area that where we've been able to get some volunteers.
So we have another question. Could you please remind us the timing of your 2023 sale again? One, when it would go live, and then two, like when pickup or actually happens?
Sure. Yeah. So we're aiming to launch it in the next few weeks. And that would be basically the online shop. So that's all pre-purchased as plants. And then our pickup will be on May 19th. So that's a Friday. So we're going to use the same model that we did last year, where we're going to get all our plants delivered that Friday morning, arrange them all, and then have a pickup in the afternoon. And we try and have the hours go past sort of normal business hours, so folks that are working can still participate. And we do encourage, if you would like to participate but aren't there that day, definitely try and reach out to your network and see if a friend can pick up the plants and hold them for you for a few days. So we get that a lot. People will, if they're going away for the week, they'll coordinate with a friend to do that. So that announcement will go out first to our Carte membership, and then to everyone on our newsletter. So if you're signed up for the Land Trust e-news, you'll see messaging about that hopefully in the next 2 weeks.
And I'll make sure to include a link in the follow-up email to all of the registrants, a link to both newsletters so that everyone can stay up to date on what's going on. So has Dr. Jagir done any follow-up surveys yet? Are there any results to report?
Bryn, do you want to take this, or you want me to?
Sure, I can take it. So he has been coming regularly during the summer to the Pollinator Meadow and Chapman Pasture. And he also has some grad students doing their own research projects at the Pollinator Meadow. So we've heard preliminary, observations, but because some of the work at Chapman, as Sara mentioned, has sort of taken on a new turn, we did delay what was originally sort of a 3-year project with results at the end to sort of stretch that timeline out. So we don't expect to have sort of that final report from Dr. Jagir for at least another year or two. So he'll continue to be monitoring the sites. But from what I've heard from him and from what we've seen on the Beecology app is that there's greater diversity, especially at the Pollinator Meadow. And we do see a pretty nice population of Bombus fervidus, which is one of our target long-tongued bumblebee species. I don't know that we've had observations of that target bee at our demonstration sites yet, fingers crossed. We're still sort of adding to them to make sure that they're, functionally diverse sites, but they're also working to be, basically outreach for this project, as we're really focusing on making those conservation areas really core habitat.
Great. So can you talk more about the rain barrels and how they are filled?
Yeah, you want to take that, Sara?
Yeah. So it's a slightly convoluted process. There is a faucet at our town conservation department's barn, which is where they store a lot of their equipment. So they have a spigot there, and they have been very generous partners with us. So what we usually do is one of our interns, like the first day of the week that they work for us, like a Tuesday morning, they would go, and we have many empty trash barrels, or like, yeah, trash barrels basically, that are in the back of our pickup truck, and they just unstack them and fill as many up as possible and drive to all of our different areas around town that have rain barrels. So right now it's actually only 2 areas, our traffic island at Codman and our roadside garden at Harrington, and they each have 2 rain barrels there that would get filled. Now that we have our permanent pavilion at the Pollinator meadow, we have 4 rain barrels there that are filled from the gutters. And so they actually have a rainstorm pretty easily fills 4 of those. But then, of course, if we are having a drought, we would need to fill those as well. And then Chapman really has almost no access of water. We didn't even bother to put rain barrels in at Chapman because it's so large. So if we have needed to hand water, we bring those garbage cans filled with water to Chapman also. So it pretty much takes like a full morning of our 2 interns to water if we're really in like the hot, dry part of the summer.
Great,
I
thanks.
do want to add, though, that part of the goal of working with these native plants is once they're established, they shouldn't need watering. So really, the reason for the temporary infrastructure is that, you know, after another year of establishment, we don't expect to water the perennials. And then if we add new plantings in, those probably will take water the first year or 2, depending on if it's a really bad drought year or not. So the end goal, of course, is to have these be very lightly managed areas. I think we found that, at least with the Pollinator meadow, it's sort of an ongoing project. Certain populations of plants get established and take off, and then other populations sort of fade out. So we are sort of continually adding plants, seeing what's surviving, what's thriving. And that is part of the reason why we wanted a more permanent water infrastructure there, because we do anticipate needing to continue to water at that site as we put in new plants. But it was great. Sara and our colleagues, Jane and Joe, set up I think Sara mentioned this, a solar water pump. So we've got a solar panel on the roof of that pavilion and a pump that we can drop into the rain barrel, and that makes attached it to a hose and watering really easy now at the meadow.
That's great. How do you ensure the plants you buy have not been treated with neonicotinoids? And I don't know if it's you guys or if people in general, how can we ensure that they haven't been treated?
So I mean, Bryn can speak more to this, but that is like one of the most basic first questions that we would ask of any nursery that we're interested in partnering with. I mean, if they are selling plants where that have neonicotinoids, it's not a nursery that we would work with. And I would encourage anyone who is out shopping for their own plants to ask, because besides finding out for yourself, if nurseries hear that is a concern and that you wouldn't buy plants if they have been treated with neonicotinoids, then it just gives them more of an incentive to understand that this is something that we really don't want added to the environment. So there are some pretty important characteristics for any nursery that we would want to work with. And that is, I would say, one of the most basic ones.
For those of us who may not quite know very much about neonicotinoids, could you give us a quick overview of, why they're added, or like what harm they do?
Yeah,
very basic.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I admit I'm not like up to date on the chemistry of it, but they're sprayed on the plant very early on, or the seeds, and they're a pesticide, so they're going to help that plant grow to flower, but unfortunately they linger, so that any pollinator that then visits that plant is going to get the neonicotinoids. And they are, I think they might be a nerve disruptor. Somebody please correct me in the comments if that's not true.
Well, they are systemic, yes. So they would, it is different from some other applications where this is applied to the seeds, and it is basically part of the entire plant. So you don't want to be encouraging pollinator insects to then come and then feed on these plants that have it, because it is an insecticide.
Okay, thank you.
So then they would be poisoned.
Right.
So are you finding that the seasonal plants are surviving their particular season so far in your work?
Seasonal plants.
So these are perennial plants, but yes, we have found that most of them do survive. There are some, I mean, we've had some that are more successful than others. And some, like I mentioned, with the deer browsing in our pollinator meadow, it was pretty clear to us what the route that the deer were taking, because those plants were getting eaten very to the ground, and other plants, that same plants, were not being touched if they were on the other side of the area. So and the ultimate goal is that these would be very hardy plants who are meant for this area and this climate. But yes, some of them need more babying than others. And also weeding is just an ongoing challenge. We always need to make sure that we are controlling any weeds around them so that they don't get choked out. And also, I mean, with climate change, it's not 100% guaranteed that what these plants have been adapted for in the past, that this will remain the climate here.
Yeah, I think our hope, to add on to that, our hope is that by trying to restore function to the ecosystem there and create biodiversity, that as a whole, that area is going to be more resilient to change. So if you have one plant in an area and it doesn't survive climate change, then you have no plants in that area. If you have 20 plants, all with a slightly different temperament, maybe some of them are going to survive the changes that we're going to see in our lifetime. But I think, to add to Sarah's point, we don't see 100% survival of plants, and it's just an unfortunate reality of planting, as nature takes its way sometimes. So for us, it's mitigated by the fact that we do plant, a good section of plants. So we'll put in maybe 20 of the same species, all in a fairly close area. And so the inner plants are a little protected. And if one dies, there's still a lot. I think one of the challenges of the plant sale and the plant kits that we found is that, if somebody buys 2 perennials and one dies, it feels really disheartening and disappointing, and it's really challenging. But when we put in 20 plants and we have 4 die, it doesn't feel as worrisome. We're looking at a bigger picture. But I do think we're going to try and help be a little bit more clear to people at future plant sales of how you can prevent deer. So I think we now do kind of recommend that you plant them in a fenced area or have some kind of protection like the plant skid if you do have a really heavy deer presence in your garden. So sometimes it can't be helped, but there are ways to mitigate and try and keep the plants alive.
Even just if you don't have a fenced area, putting a little fence around each, for some of my plants, I just put a little circle of chicken wire around the young plants. And especially with my willows, I had to do that the first year, and now they're so vigorous that they're 3 years old and they're fine and they don't get eaten. And then I have some others, I planted a beach plum, which Bryn still hears me complain about, that I was so careful. I mulched around it. I put a little fence around it, and then it was eaten from the bottom by by vol, I'm guessing. So, you know, even when we make the best preparations, it says, you know, sometimes we're still taken by surprise. And I saw that there was a question about like more specific, which plants do well and which don't. It's really different based on each one of our areas. Like our Codman traffic island there's no shade. So it really, even more so than the other areas, it kind of bakes in the sun. So we had some plants that just don't do well there, but in other areas where there was a little bit more shade and it was, you know, it wasn't like pavement reflecting back, they did fine. So I think it kind of just depends on the, you know, the microclimate of where you're planting.
Okay, we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So if you have any lingering questions, please send them in now. But we do have a comment here. So we know that you're in your first couple of years of, you know, getting these plants and gardens and meadows established, but at some point, you know, will there be the need to divide the plants? And is there, you know, is that another volunteer effort? How does that end up perpetuating itself?
I think that eventually we would like to have more seed collection and sowing and propagating. That is really a great way to propagate our plants. And we're still looking into some different possibilities of like sheltered areas where we could overwinter some of our seedlings, and whether we have a volunteer day where we have some volunteers come to help us, and then as you know, a thank you, they can take some of the cuttings. But that even more, I think, requires volunteers who really are pretty experienced gardeners, so that they're not necessarily damaging what they're helping us to propagate. Maybe more so than just like digging some holes to help plants. So it might be just a slightly different crowd of volunteers. But yeah, I think that eventually is the goal, even if it's just to help ourselves at LLCT fill out more of our areas if we're not selling them. But yeah, Bryn could probably speak more to that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the gardens filling in, the plants sort of manage that themselves, and that once they've filled the available space, they just settle in. So we don't really have the problem of overcrowding. If we felt like one plant was starting to dominate, we might decide to pull out an area, replant somewhere else and put in a new species. But I think it would be very dependent on that situation. If a native plant is being successful in an area, I think we would not necessarily want to change that dynamic. Yeah, as Sarah said, we had a seed collection workshop this past fall at our meadow. So we had about, actually that's the group. Oh, I don't have my screen share. The last slide we showed, there was a group in the pavilion, and that was what they were doing. And then we invited those people back in December to do a milk jug sowing. So we had them, this is something that a lot of towns and folks working in this area are doing right now, which is sowing into milk jugs in December and letting them overwinter outside in a sheltered area. And then the seedlings will germinate, and then you can transplant from there. So that's something that we've started this year, and I think assuming it's successful, we'll continue to do. And at some point, maybe we'll reach a point where we no longer need to buy plants, but we'll instead be just encouraging people to grow seedlings and facilitating that, or potentially growing our own.
Great. Okay, so we've got our 2 final questions. Okay, the first, what is your relationship with the local garden club like? Specifically, do they also sell pollinator plants at their sale, and are they supportive in general of your efforts?
Yeah, so the local garden club is great. I'd say they're generally supportive. In 2020, when we first launched this project, we did as an organization go to one of their meetings and present on this topic and sort of get interest and a general education for their members. So they have their own plant sale, which happens every other year, and it's a lot of plant sharing between the members' gardens, so it's not necessarily native, but they do put a big emphasis on offering some native plugs for sale. So there's definitely an awareness and an interest in native plants and plants that support pollination systems.
Good. And the final question, are you thinking of a rain barrel sale again this year?
I don't think
I'll take that,
this year.
Sarah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think this year. I think we might do it every perhaps 5 years, because once you have a rain barrel, you don't really need more. So, and we did have a pretty successful sale of rain barrels. So I just don't know how many people actually need a rain barrel, but you know, they were a great company to work with. So we haven't ruled it out for the future. I just think that it's not something that really makes that much sense to do more frequently than maybe every 5 years.
Yeah, I'd say administratively, we probably would do it separately from the plant sale if we were to do it again. But we also, I think if we were to do it again, we would do it in closer collaboration with the water department and potentially have them take the lead on that. Because I think they're just better equipped to share the resources. And then we would potentially play a supporting role.
Great. Okay, so with that, we're at 8 o'clock and I think we're ready to end the evening. Is there anything, the two of you, do you have any last things you'd like to add?
I did just see that one. The question about the B. viridis, I am pretty sure that that was a Bombus viridis.
Yes, that first slide. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So thank you again, Bryn and Sara, and thank you for all of your hard work and to all of the people in Lincoln who are contributing to these efforts. I hope this catches on in more of the communities in the heritage area as well. And thank you for all of our attendees who are still with us. Again, I will be sending out a follow-up email by the end of the week. We'll have a recording of this webinar, a whole bunch of resources for you. And the last note is that our final webinar of this series will be April 18th. Kelly Gill from the Xerces Society and the USDA NRCS will be presenting on the different creating pollinator habitat through farm bill conservation programs. So really looking at the different ways that communities can finance and look for grant opportunities to actually get this work done in their communities. So I'll include a registration link for that in the email as well. I hope you all had a wonderful first day of spring and look forward to connecting with you again soon. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.